This month, there was a chord change on a 639-year-long organ performance in a small church in Germany. It's about 4% done. And the All the Stops podcast is a top 25% podcast globally. This and more coming up in this episode. Well, here we are, episode 30 of the All the Stops podcast. And I thought I would take a quick break from our interviews that we typically do. We have another great interview coming next week, so don't worry, and you won't have to listen to my voice for too much longer today. It's going to be a short episode, but I wanted to just do a little bit of a retrospective and look forward a little bit. And I wanted to start by saying, as near as I can tell, we are officially in the top 25, maybe 23, something like that, percent of podcasts globally already with just 30 episodes. And I must say, I didn't expect this. I knew it would be a slow start because how do you just start a podcast out of nowhere? But what's really cool is that the guests have all been amazing. They've all been very willing to jump on, and we've just seen constant growth. And so the way it works is you judge the success of a podcast by how many downloads you get in your first 7 days. And so we're kind of higher than I would have dared hope we would be even 50 episodes in. And then what happens is people come along after and listen through the past. So, there are people who will be listening to this episode who are kind of just now on episode 2 or 3. And so if you're hearing this episode and it's like the winter or something, hello. Glad to have you with us. And then if you're listening and you've been listening from the start, I just want to thank you and say how much I appreciate you being here and being invested in the world of the pipe organ and all the people who help make it what it is. I've learned so many things through the process of this, and I went to school for organ. I have 2 graduate degrees in organ and an artist diploma, and I think every single episode there are things that I learn. And I hope you have learned some things along the way. If you haven't learned anything, I want to have you on the show because you'd be a very impressive person, I would say. We're going to continue. We're going to keep doing our thing. And I've mentioned before that I want to start launching the other shows. The idea of this was always that it was going to be a podcast network. And so we will have other shows coming up. I won't even be on most or any of them maybe, but we've got a few things in the works, and they'd be shows in related fields. Think, choral music, think kind of some sacred stuff, and various other subfields. So I'll keep you posted about that. Nothing to announce now. I am really trying to build things up so that we can get a producer here. So if you have it in you to jump on patreon.com/allthestopsmedia and do a little subscription there, it's I think the monthly cost is less than a beer, maybe even less than a latte a month. And the idea is you sort of share the load between a lot of people, and it could really, really help us. If you can't do that, that is totally fine. But I would ask you to drop a review on Apple or Spotify or whatever. Most of you listen on Apple, I've noticed. And I sort of launched through Spotify as the main hub. And we have hundreds of subscribers on Spotify, but that's not where most of you are. Most of you listen only. Most of you don't see the video version at all. So if you are seeing the video version, you're part of a very elite crew. And I hope you like looking at the terrible background I have that is 2 paintings over a couch. So anyway, if you could leave a review or something like that, it would help us a lot. Anyway, we're going to be talking about this piece that has been performed since I was a child, and they just had a chord shift. So let's talk about John Cage. Remember that we have an official watch here at All the Stops Media. It's the Griffith Watch Company. They are made personally, assembled by the founder, Ralph Griffith, who's an amazing person. They're amazing watches, and you can get 10% off on these watches by using the offer code ALLTHESTOPS at griffithwatches.com. He's a great person. He left a tenure track position and started this watch company so he could spend more time with his son, who has autism, and proceeds from each watch sold go to Autism Speaks. Any rate, let's talk John Cage here. So this is from this month from the Associated Press by Stephanie Dazio and David Keaton. And it brings us up to speed here in Halberstadt, Germany. A small organ in eastern Germany is the headliner of the world's slowest concert. It has been playing the same piece of music by composer John Cage at a glacial pace for nearly 25 years. A rare chord change on Wednesday, this was early in the month here, it took it from 7 notes to 8. And they say here it represented the completion of about 4% of the 639-year endeavor of the John Cage organ project Halberstadt. So people packed into the room to see this. And when this piece started, it was just before 9/11. I was 10 years old, I think. 10 years old, something like that, 11. And I remember hearing about this piece through high school. It was like this kind of legend. And I thought, whoa, wow, they're playing that piece over there. And what an interesting experience. I didn't know much about John Cage. And now it's been 25 years of this piece playing. So it basically just holds these chords and it has just stacked a new one on. And so what is the point of this? Well, I don't think I can say exactly what the point is. I'm not in a position to do that, but I wanted to offer some thoughts. You may know the piece 4 minutes and 33 seconds by John Cage. And this is a fascinating piece that gets talked about a lot in art circles. And when that piece came out, you could definitely describe it as a riot in a way. It was overturning the ideas, it was shaking to the core the idea of what music is. And if you don't know, the piece is absolute silence. Or is it? A pianist sits down and is at the piano, and then they sit for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, and then they're done, and the piece is over. And it upsets people. Some people just think, what are you doing? Like, this isn't music, is it? And I suppose John Cage liked to poke the bear in a way. He's famous for prepared piano pieces and things like that, where you shove paper clips and pencils and stuff into a piano to make these interesting sonorities, push the boundaries of how instruments were intended to make music. But in the case of that, I think the coolest experience I had with it was in music school at Oberlin Conservatory when we talked about that piece for the first time. The professor of the class I was taking had us do a live performance in the class. And so this was like an entry level kind of it was a music history class that you have to do at the conservatory basically. And we all sat, and I would say there were upwards of 120 people in a small lecture hall, but packed in like sardines. And so we sort of began the performance, and it's quiet, but what you notice is that people are making the sounds that people make. They're fidgeting and they're shuffling in their seats, and you also hear people walk by outside. You hear different clicks and sounds. Remember somebody in high heels walking by the lecture hall, for example, in that performance. And then what happens is the whole group of people in the room kind of go on this journey together where the social discomfort rises and rises and rises. And it's kind of like 4 minutes and 33 seconds is like the exact right amount of time to just make you really uncomfortable and make you feel like, oh, okay, make it stop. And we finished the piece. We kind of discussed it. Again, this was like a large class. This wasn't a small, intimate discussion. But the idea being, every time you do that, it's different. And you realize even without someone playing piano, so to speak, everyone's tied into the performance. And you experience a lot of things that you would expect and hope people would feel at a concert. So that kind of group dynamics and the feeling of all being focused on something on the stage. And then the idea, of course, that sound is music, right? People talk about what is music at its most basic form, and you can't really define words exactly as something, not in this post-structural world, but the idea of like you can't whittle something down to a necessary and sufficient grouping of things that is the platonic form of the word. But if you wanted to offer some kind of thing for music, people will often say that music has to be sound that is intended to be music and that is organized. And so, people will go into it and they'll talk about like Quranic chant, the type of chanting that is used to present the words of the Quran. And a lot of people will make the case that that's not music because it's ostensibly just a way to present the text. And even though it functions like music in many ways and it sounds like music, it maybe doesn't have the intention of being music. And at a certain extent, these are like the conversations about, if a hot dog is a sandwich, like what is a sandwich? And it's kind of a fun conversation to have, I suppose. And that's probably what podcasts are for, is to talk about hot dogs and sandwiches. But it's not really that fruitful because what is music or whatever? Is birdsong music? Well, Olivier Messiaen will copy birdsong on the organ and present it, and then, well, that's music because he's intending to make it music. Is it music when the birds do it, or is it types of mating calls and various other things? These are interesting questions, but the point is, with John Cage, 4 minutes and 33 seconds, you were supposed to, I think, just push the boundaries of what music was, draw people's attention to, it is organized sound, but it's the farthest out that you could get. And it stands over against the French movement musique concrète, that would be like prepared tape music and things like that, where every single parameter was controlled by the composer. And in this case, almost nothing was controlled by the composer. Now, let's jump over to this piece in Halberstadt. So the composition, we're back to the article from the AP. The composition, called Organ Squared /ASLSP, which stands for as slow as possible, is scheduled to finish on September 4th, 2640. So they say an electric powered blower system sends wind into the organ to create a continuous sound. A chord change done manually means that the sound of the organ pipes changes either because new sounds are added or existing sounds end. They talk about, how many people squeezed into the room and all of that. What's fun here, for 3 minutes, the crowd listened to the old chord with its 7 pipes. Then an 8th pipe was slotted into the small organ, bringing with it a new sound that reverberated throughout the church. The spectators listened for another 3 minutes, some filming with cell phones, others taking it all in with their eyes closed and heads bowed, before breaking out into applause with cries of bravo. So 25 years in. So I think that this piece is stretching the bounds of music in a way beyond the human scope. I can't imagine what it would have been like to be in that little room and hear that change, but there is something unique about being a part of something that is bigger than your sense of scale. I think when you walk into an ancient church or an ancient building, a historical place, it does help you think, well, who am I, and what is my lifespan, and where do I fit into this track of things that humans have been doing? I think to have an ongoing organ piece, you kind of know you're here for some section of it, but the piece, I mean, it can remind you, as you're in a church, and it can remind you of like some divine ear listening. It's like the old cathedrals where they would build, crosses into the building, or figures that sort of, the idea was they could be seen from heaven, and that even if no human being could notice the figuration of the Trinity or the cross or whatever, that God above would see it and would know. There is something that feels really big to the idea of a piece that's just being performed for over 600 years. And what's cool about it is that the organ is the only instrument that could do this, right? It's the instrument that just sustains, and as long as you hold it, as long as there's wind, it'll just keep going, which I think is fascinating. It reminds me of the movie Interstellar, where Hans Zimmer used the organ very famously. I don't know if this is fully confirmed or not. There's probably footage of him talking about it, but people would argue, is the organ being used in Interstellar because it's this sacred sort of church instrument? It reminds you of big thoughts, big divine sort of thoughts. Yeah, maybe. But also it's the instrument that just sustains and sustains and sustains. And so it goes on and on and on and on and on, like space. And it just kind of has an eternal feeling to it. And of course, Hans Zimmer used a little bit of minimalism in that score to just kind of have this star-like, just repeated figures that just go on and on. Anyhow, it's neat that people were able to go be a part of that and hear that live. I think that if you're interested, you should Google it, and maybe if you're near Halberstadt, Germany sometime, you could pop in and hear a little bit of that piece. Next week, we'll be back with our regular programming. Next week, we're going to have Dave Brown on with Bussard Organ Company, talking about building instruments at Bussard, but also restoring English organs that are sort of being rescued and saved and given a brand new life in new locations. Process of restoration. Fascinating episode coming next week. Remember that you can write to us at info@allthestopsmedia.com and give your comments and questions. You have a chance to be read on the show. And once again, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for taking this ride with us. Patreon.com/allthestopsmedia. You'll get an ad-free version every week with bonus content coming soon, even more of it. So thank you all. Let's keep celebrating the King of Instruments and enjoying this major growth trajectory that we are on. I got to tell you, it's unstoppable. I haven't posted a video in like multiple weeks. I've had 2.5 million views or so on Instagram, for example, in the last month, and people just keep watching and are fascinated by the instrument. There are too many kids who want to study here that we're finding like you can't even find enough teachers, and there's a major growth trajectory going on. Millions and millions and millions of people per week, per month, engaging with organ content, music, and it's looking up. So thanks for being a part of it, and enjoy the King of Instruments. We'll see you next week. All the Stops podcast is a product and trademark of All the Stops Media LLC and is recorded and produced by me, Wesley Hall. The music is written and recorded by me too. Copyright 2026, all rights reserved. Thanks for listening.